Chapter 1. Dad. I want to change the engagement with the Garcia family. Change partner? What's wrong? Misty? Did that boy, Henry Garcia, bully you? Misty tightened her knuckles around the mobile phone. Her voice calm. He didn't bully me, Dad. I just don't want to chase after him anymore. A few seconds later, the middle-aged man's voice carried a hint of sympathy. I've told you before. Henry has Asperger syndrome and simply doesn't understand how to love, no matter how talented or outstanding he is. He's not suitable to be a husband. There are plenty of other boys in the Garcia family. Who do you want to choose this time? The other 6 childhood suitors from the Garcia family passed through Misty's mind, and she slowly said, "Let's choose John." Misty's father laughed heartily twice. "All right. My dear daughter has great taste. John is the eldest and has been raised as the heir since childhood. He's exceptionally capable, impeccable in his manners, and certainly better than that Henry. I've long wanted to choose him as my son-in-law." The Law family and the Garcia family have been close friends for generations. The Garcia family has had many male heirs but hasn't had a daughter for 2 consecutive generations. So they have cherished Misty dearly from a young age. When she was 12, the 2 families decided to formalize the engagement. Grandpa Garcia announced that among the 6 men of the Garcia family's generation, she was free to choose whoever she wished. That day, John, the eldest Garcia who was studying abroad, didn't return home. Among the lively, mischievous boys, Misty pointed toward Henry, quietly playing Sudoku in the corner, wearing a clean white shirt. Later, Henry was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome and had an IQ of 200. His daily behavior was monotonous and rigid. He was cold, spoke little, and lacked empathy. His eyes seemed fixed only on math and code. The phrase he said to Misty most often was, "Don't make noise." But Misty simply liked him. She adored his remarkably handsome face, his extraordinary intellect, the way his long fingers typed code, and the focused expression in his amber eyes. Misty made every effort to follow in his footsteps, hoping to find common ground with him. At 15, Henry was admitted to a prestigious youth program for the next 3 years of high school. Misty studied relentlessly, sleeping only 5 hours a night, ultimately gaining admission to the computer science department at a university. When she began university at 18, Henry had already earned his PhD and become a mentor in the computer science department. Besides attending classes, he spends almost all his time in the school's computer room. Misty moved into his 2-bedroom apartment off campus to take care of his daily needs. Everyone at school knows Misty is Henry's fiancé, a match arranged since childhood. They also know she has pursued Henry tirelessly. But Misty doesn't mind, because she knows Henry's eyes have slowly started to see her. He notices the blisters on her hands when Misty delivers meals and says to her, "Thank you for your hard work." He notices her pale face during her menstrual period and tries to learn how to make brown sugar water for her. On rainy days, he reminds Misty to bring an umbrella. Misty thought everything was improving, and Henry was gradually learning to love. But when she brought him meals, she noticed a cup of milk tea left on his desk for an entire week. Henry never drank milk tea. Guided by a woman's intuition, she opened the mobile phone he had left in the living room while he was working. Henry had fewer than 10 WeChat conversations, and Misty's name was set to Do Not Disturb. At the very top, pinned, was a name, Celestine, with a profile picture of a beautiful girl, chatting animatedly with Henry. She complained that the advanced math class was dull and difficult to understand. Henry offered to tutor her. She complained about the cafeteria food being unappetizing. Henry said he would take her to a restaurant outside. She said it was raining and she hadn't brought an umbrella. Henry said, "I'm outside your classroom, here to pick you up after class." Misty glanced at the date. It was the very day Henry had messaged her, reminding her to bring an umbrella. That day, Misty sat in class holding her mobile phone, smiling like a fool. After class, she ran back to the apartment, soaked through by the rain, then grabbed an umbrella and hurried to the computer room at school to meet him. The rain was heavy that day, and the air humid, yet inside, she felt both dry and warm. At this moment, Misty's heart ached as if pricked by needles as she kept scrolling through their chat history. "What are you doing?" A cold accusation echoed from the study's door. Henry quickly stepped forward and snatched the mobile phone from her hand. "Why are you touching my phone?" Misty looked intently into his eyes. "Who is Celestine?" "You like her." Don't you? Henry remained emotionless. It's none of your business. Misty faltered for a moment, anger rising in her chest. Henry, you are my fiancé. You share your daily life with other women every day. You've already crossed the line. Henry's eyebrows knitted ever so slightly. I have never denied that you are my fiancé. But you shouldn't have touched my mobile phone. You violated my privacy. After speaking, he turned and walked back to the study. Misty watched his retreating figure, a wave of helplessness welling up inside her. That was the first time she entertained the thought of giving up. Later, in an empty classroom, she saw Henry and the girl named Celestine again. They sat side by side, with Henry patiently guiding her through an advanced math problem. Misty stood at the back of the classroom, watching Henry explain a basic first-year advanced math problem for the 10th time. The girl still shook her head, her bright, clear eyes fixed on him. What should I do? Professor Garcia? I still don't understand. Am I just too stupid? Henry Garcia gave her a faint smile. You're not stupid at all. I just didn't explain it well. As Misty watched, tears suddenly rolled down her cheeks. Over the years, she had pestered Henry to help her solve countless problems, but he either ignored her or explained only once. It was the first time Misty realized that Henry, the man so intolerant of what he called stupidity, who always looked at her with impatience, could make an exception for a girl. That was the second time Misty thought about giving up. The third time was today, when a classmate sent her a link via the campus network. In that post, Henry, wearing a white shirt, was fiercely protecting Celestine in a dark alley, fighting off several thugs ahead. In the last photo, he held Celestine in his arms, using his back to absorb the punches and kicks from several men behind him. He looked down at Celestine, his face filled with anxiety, pain, and worry. Misty finally saw an expression on Henry's face that she had never witnessed in 20 years. In that moment, she completely decided to let go. She thought Henry simply couldn't learn to love others. But in truth, he just couldn't learn to love her. Misty walked to the mirror, gazing at the woman with thick glasses reflected back at her. How had she changed so much for the sake of one man? Her eyes had always been beautiful, but after 3 grueling years of high school and in her effort to catch up quickly with Henry, she began wearing glasses. Misty smiled softly, unlocked her mobile phone, and searched for a chain clinic that performed myopia surgery. 2 hours later, having finished her myopia surgery and stepping outside wearing sunglasses, she received a friend request from the eldest son of the Garcia family, John Garcia. Little sister Misty, this is John. Have you given the engagement matter careful thought? Misty smiled slowly. Of course. I welcome your advice, my fiancé. John replied quickly, all right. Then we will hold the engagement banquet in a month. Chapter 2. Back at the apartment, Misty received a message from Henry. I am injured. At the hospital. Right after came the hospital name and ward number. Misty's fingers tightened around the mobile phone. It was the first time she didn't reply to his messages or rush to the hospital to care for him. She packed a few things simply and moved back to the school dormitory. Her roommates gathered around, looking at her with sympathetic eyes. Misty, are you all right? What exactly is the relationship between Professor Garcia and that Celestine? Lately, there have been quite a few rumors. People say they've seen Celestine bringing milk tea to Professor Garcia, Professor Garcia waiting for Celestine after class, and even the two walking together on the playground. Who in the whole school doesn't know that Professor Garcia already has a fiancé? They're just shameless. Misty smiled instead and reassured them. Don't be upset. My fiancé has already been switched to Henry, his older brother. The dormitory fell silent for a moment. Then cheers erupted. That night, Henry called her several times, but she didn't pick up. By noon the next day, after class ended, she had finished eating with her roommate in the cafeteria. On the way back, she ran into Henry beneath the dormitory. He still wore a white shirt, standing tall and upright, but his face was bruised, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed scratches on his arms. Henry strode toward her, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Why didn't you go to the hospital? Misty looked away from the wounds on his arms and said evenly, you were hospitalized to save Celestine. Having her take care of you is enough. But you are my fiancé. His tone carried a certain coldness, as if he were upset that she hadn't gone to the hospital to care for him. Misty felt a heavy ache in her chest. her voice growing colder. It soon won't be that way anymore. She was about to leave when Henry grabbed her wrist. Are you angry? He asked. He furrowed his brows slightly, his tone confused. Celestine was in danger yesterday. As a professor, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Misty, what are you upset about? I'm upset. The emotions Misty had been restraining suddenly burst out. Henry, how come I never knew you were so warm-hearted, even willing to fight others? Her eyes were red as she said, you know I'm your fiancé, so why can you stand in front of others but not in front of me? During the winter break when she was 16, she begged Henry, who was going home for the holidays, to go watch a movie. On the way there, Henry was constantly on the phone with classmates discussing programming algorithms, while she went to buy milk tea and was dragged into a dark alley by a few thugs. She struggled desperately and cried for help until the last moment before she was assaulted. When the police finally arrived and rescued her, later, she learned from the police that it was Henry who had called them. When she angrily confronted him, Henry had already gone home and was sitting at the computer studying his program. Faced with her anger and accusations, he calmly explained, when you're in danger, turning to the police is the right thing to do. I simply made a reasonable judgment and choice. She was frightened and feeling wronged, tears streaming down her face as she looked at him. Aren't you afraid something might happen to me? No, 16-year-old Henry said firmly, his gaze unwavering. The place is within a 10-minute police response time. You'll be safe. After saying that, he lowered his head and returned to his work. That issue was quietly set aside, yet it lingered like a thorn lodged in her heart. And over time, the wound festered and oozed. She never dared to touch it. She comforted herself. Henry was just like that. Asperger syndrome naturally causes certain deficits in personality and emotions. This was her own choice. But yesterday, he so recklessly stood in front of another woman. A cold chill spread across Misty's face. Henry looked impatient. Don't make a fuss. I've already explained that to you. He was always like this, never able to empathize with others' feelings. But this time, Misty didn't want to endure it. She wiped the tears from her face forcefully, staring into his naturally cold, distant eyes. Henry, no one is making a fuss. Our engagement is over. From today on, I am no longer your fiancé. If you like Celestine, then you can be with her. Chapter 3. Henry's face darkened completely. Misty, marriage is not something to be used for spite. You are my fiancé. Misty knew this was his innate sense of rules and rigid cognition at play. She didn't want to argue and walked past him toward the dormitory building. A clear female voice came from behind. Senior student Misty. Please wait a moment. Misty turned instinctively and saw Celestine rushing up, gently pulling Henry's sleeve. Looking up at him, Professor Garcia. Please don't argue with the senior student. This began because of me. Let me explain to her. Henry looked at her with a much softer gaze. Thank you for your help. Seal. Misty mulled over the word, then suddenly smiled. Before she turned 18, Henry always called her Misty with quiet formality, using both her first and last names. It wasn't until she got into a university, after pestering him endlessly and correcting him countless times, that he finally began to call her simply Misty. Yet he had only known Celestine for a short while, and his manner of addressing her felt so natural. Misty's heart was sharply pricked, as if by a needle. The scene before her eyes felt unbearably harsh. She did not refuse Celestine and walked with her to a small grove nearby. They stood facing each other. Senior female student. Celestine smiled. You already know about the situation with Professor Garcia, don't you? Misty laughed. Your situation? Are you trying to say that you're in a relationship with my fiancé? Celestine wasn't angry. Senior female student. There's no need to be so sharp. I'm not with Professor Garcia. But I think you can tell, Professor Garcia's attitude toward me is different. At least better than toward you. His fiancé, isn't it? Misty met her challenging gaze with a smile. Celestine, are you trying to provoke me? Celestine smiled as well. Professor Garcia is a doctoral advisor, and I'm just a freshman. We shouldn't have any connection. But do you know how I came to meet Professor Garcia? 2 months ago at noon, as I was passing the small path outside the computer room, I found Professor Garcia had just fainted from low blood sugar. I gave him the milk tea I had and only left once I saw he was okay. That was just an ordinary thing. But half a month later, when I passed that path again, I saw Professor Garcia sitting on a bench holding the milk tea. He was waiting for me. Misty's heart fluttered, and her fingers curled instinctively. Celestine wore a proud smile. He said he bought milk tea and waited on that street for half a month, just to see me again. Misty. With a genius like Professor Garcia, his habits and daily routine are all laid bare on the forum. Yet he waited for me for half a month, proactively added me on WeChat, and chats with me every day. He's impatient with ignorance, yet he explains problems to me over and over. He picks me up after class, accompanies me to the cafeteria for meals, and goes shopping with me off campus. The first movie we watched was his idea. The WeChat avatar I'm using now was taken by him. Oh, and you saw the milk tea on his desk, right? It's my favorite flavor. And Professor Garcia said he likes it too. Celestine summed up a Henry completely unknown to Misty in just a few words. Her heart felt as if it were placed on a millstone, ground round and round until it was utterly crushed. Misty clenched her palm, forcibly suppressing the pain in her heart, and sneered coldly. So what? Who in the whole school doesn't know Henry is Misty's fiancé? You're making such a big fuss. Is it because you're worried no one knows you're desperate to be the other woman? Celestine's face flushed with anger. Misty, you. Misty continued sarcastically. Come on, it's 2025. Surely no one still believes that being unloved automatically makes you the other woman, right? Chapter 4. Celestine raised her hand in anger and slapped Misty hard across the face. Before the slap could land, Misty firmly caught Celestine's hand with one palm, while her other hand struck Celestine's face. Although I don't want to fight over a man with you, this slap's for the past 2 months I've endured. Misty released her hand. Celestine covered her face, shot her an angry glare, then turned and slammed into a tree with force. She screamed loudly as blood trickled down her forehead. Henry rushed into the woods, seeing the handprint on Celestine's face and the blood on her forehead. Anxiety crossed his face. Seal, are you okay? That year, she rushed into his study disheveled to confront him. Yet he never showed an expression like that. Misty smiled coldly and sarcastically, meeting Henry's angry gaze. Misty, how can you hit someone? Misty looked at the two in their intimate posture, arms crossed. Just to clarify, the slap on her face was from me, but the wound on her forehead she gave herself. Please don't throw dirt on me for everything. Not you? Henry looked at her defiant stance and laughed angrily. Misty, this isn't the first time you've beaten someone to a pulp. What? Now that you've grown up, you dare to act but won't admit it? Misty looked into his eyes, and suddenly felt the blood chill through her veins. Since the engagement to Henry at 12, she had considered him her own. During the time Henry was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, mischievous children often whispered behind his back, calling him crazy. Back then, Henry was always lost in his own world. Once, a group of rowdy kids surrounded and beat him, leaving his clean white shirt covered in footprints. She happened to be passing by and, furious, picked up a stone from the roadside, rushed over, grabbed one of them, and struck his head with it. The other children were terrified and swarmed over all at once. After that, she got into several fights for him, but the things she did for him have now been turned into baseless charges he uses to blame her. Misty's eyes were red. She blinked hard to clear the haze and glared at Henry angrily. I, Misty, have always dared to stand by my actions. If I didn't do it, I won't admit it. Henry, all those fights I got into were for you. What right do you have to accuse me? Did I tell you to fight? Henry's cold retort hit her like a bucket of ice water. She pressed her lips, gave him a long, searching look, then turned and walked away. Her hand was suddenly grabbed by him, so forcefully that she staggered. Apologized to Seal. Misty met Celestine's proud, triumphant gaze. Since the injury, she hadn't even uttered a word, but Henry was already eager to defend her. Misty stared at Henry holding her hand, gripped it tightly with both of hers, and bit sharply on his forearm. Only when the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth did Henry, wincing in pain, finally let go. Misty finally relaxed her mouth, cast a glance at the grim, blood-stained teeth marks, and turned away. After that day, Misty and Henry never contacted each other again. News about Henry and Celestine occasionally reached her ears. The two were openly seen together everywhere, and everyone was spreading the news that Henry and Misty had ended their engagement. Except for attending classes, Misty devoted all her energy to the upcoming robot competition. That Saturday, several roommates pulled her along, insisting she join them at a social gathering between clubs. Misty refused, saying, "I still have an engagement. It's not appropriate for me to attend a social event. You all go ahead." A few roommates kept pestering her. "It's okay. Just think of it as going to a normal get-together. Look at you, you've lost weight from being so busy lately. You should go out and have some fun to relax." Misty agreed, dressed up beautifully with a few roommates, and set off. The social event was at a laid-back bar off campus, with pleasant lighting and atmosphere, mostly attended by university students. Young men and women sat together introducing themselves, and the atmosphere quickly became lively. Misty was happily chatting with the person beside her while sipping a cocktail, when a large hand suddenly grabbed her wrist from behind and yanked her up sharply. A cold, angry accusation cut through her ears. "Misty, what are you doing?" Chapter 5. Misty's wrist ached as she shook off Henry's hand. "It's none of your business." "None of your business?" Henry exuded a tense atmosphere. "Misty, don't forget you have a fiancé." Misty's gaze slid past Henry's shoulder, resting on Celestine's face behind him. "At least I'm not drinking alone with a man in a bar." Celestine hurried forward, feigning an explanation. "Senior, don't be angry. I was just curious about the bar, so I asked Professor Garcia to accompany me." As the atmosphere grew increasingly tense, the classmates around them began to speak up. "How about we all play together?" Misty blurted out. "No." Henry spoke at the same time. "All right." He glanced at Misty, then took Celestine's hand and sat down beside her. Everyone started playing board games. After a few rounds, Henry's sheer intellect dominated, leading Celestine to victory. The mood stiffened again, and someone suggested playing Truth or Dare. Celestine was the first to lose. She chose Dare and drew a challenge to go to the door and ask the third man who came in for his contact information. Celestine bit her lower lip, about to stand, when Henry stopped her from behind. "Give up. I'll drink for her." Everyone around was jeering, but Misty said nothing, her hand resting by her side quietly clenched. Henry, who normally didn't drink, downed 3 full mugs of beer in one go. After that, Henry drank several rounds on Celestine's behalf. He was about 30% drunk. At just that moment, Henry lost the round and chose Truth. Misty spoke first. "I'll ask." The room suddenly fell silent. Misty turned her head, meeting Henry's slightly dazed eyes, and softly asked, "Is Celestine the one you like?" In that moment, the air seemed to freeze, the colorful lights dimmed, and in Misty's eyes, there was only Henry's rare, confused gaze. She wanted to hear him say the answer aloud. Henry remained silent, the hand resting on the table clenched suddenly, veins standing out clearly. At that very instant, a cracking sound came from above. Misty looked up just as the lighting rig on the bar's ceiling suddenly came loose and crashed down in their direction. Screams echoed as the crowd scattered in chaos. Misty's pupils contracted sharply as she turned to grab Henry, but her hand found only emptiness. Henry, who had been looking her way, suddenly spun around and swiftly pulled Celestine up, retreating several steps. The lampstand crashed heavily onto Misty's back, knocking her to the ground. Within moments, she felt her back growing wet. "Misty!" Sharp shouts from her roommate rang in her ears. Misty turned to look at Henry, who was comforting a frightened Celestine in his arms. Misty suddenly smiled. She had already received his answer. It matched exactly what she had imagined in her heart. She could finally give up hope. Misty sank into darkness. She woke again in the hospital. Several roommates, their eyes red from crying, rushed over as soon as they saw her awake. Misty's gaze instinctively swept around the hospital room, and a few roommates spoke angrily. Henry went to comfort the frightened Celestine. Henry was originally supposed to go with the ambulance, but Celestine kept crying, so Henry chose to stay and comfort her. "This is too much, Misty. Henry isn't worthy of your kindness. He doesn't deserve your love." The roommate logged onto the campus network and found a photo. In the night, Henry carried Celestine in a princess carry as they walked along the tree-lined path back to school. The streetlights made Celestine's eyes shine brightly. Henry looked down at her, his gaze focused and tinged with tenderness. Under this post, everyone was shipping the two of them, praising how perfectly matched they are. Misty saw the most liked comment, so what if they're from equivalent social backgrounds? So what if they were childhood friends? If there's no love, there's no love. Misty liked him for so long. Yet in the end, she got nothing. Misty looked at the comment and suddenly felt a wave of relief in her heart. Her eyes reddened as she spoke slowly. I don't love him anymore. I, Misty, will never love Henry again. Just as she finished speaking, a cold, clear voice sounded at the door. Is that so? Chapter 6. Several roommates stepped out. Henry strode to Misty's hospital bed, his eyes filled with the certainty and confidence of being loved. Misty, if you don't love me, why do you care about who I like? Misty remained calm. After all these years, I need to give myself a clear answer. Henry, you've already answered my question through your actions. Henry fell silent once again. Misty knew he never lied, nor did he bother to tell one. But he said, Misty, our engagement still stands. Misty looked at him in disbelief. You mean you like Celestine but still want to marry me? Henry, do you realize what you're saying? I do. He remained calm. Misty, I hope you'll give me some time. Once we're married, I will completely sever that relationship. But until then, I hope you won't interfere with me. Misty laughed. She truly found it utterly absurd. Henry, I've told you many times, our engagement is off. Before she could finish, Henry's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and put the call on speaker. Mrs. Garcia's voice was urgent. Son, I've just received news from the old house. The Garcia family's engagement banquet is at the end of the month, and the one engaged to Misty. I know. Henry hung up before Mrs. Garcia could finish. Then he looked at Misty. I'll follow your wishes about the engagement banquet date. But in the time before the wedding, I hope you won't interfere with me. He turned and walked away. Misty tugged at the corner of her mouth, but couldn't bring herself to smile. He was so certain she loved him enough to tolerate him seeing other people, loved him enough to dismiss her talks of calling off the engagement as mere childish stubbornness. If that's the case, then let him witness for himself at the engagement banquet whether Misty can truly let him go. 3 days later, Misty was discharged from the hospital and returned to the dormitory. While packing, she realized she had left a beloved bracelet in Henry's apartment. She went to retrieve it, knocking repeatedly on the door, but no one answered. She thought Henry wasn't home, so she took out the key and opened the door. But the moment she stepped inside, she saw Henry sitting on the sofa, Celestine straddling his lap. The two were kissing passionately, their clothes slightly rumpled. Misty's breath caught, frozen in place, as prickling, sharp pain spread uncontrollably through her heart. The sound of the door opening and the key dropping startled the two locked in their passionate kiss. Celestine screamed and rolled behind Henry for cover. Henry's once dazed eyes hardened, and the voice he used to look at Misty carried a note of displeasure. Sorry. Misty spoke first, her voice a little hoarse. I knocked. I thought no one was home, so I opened the door. She hurried past the two of them. I'm just here to grab something and then I'll leave. Misty closed her bedroom door. Her hands and feet felt cold as she searched quickly and anxiously, finally finding the necklace tucked into the mattress seam. When she opened the door and stepped out, Henry was feeding Celestine some fruit. Stop! Henry called out to her, his gaze calm and indifferent. Leave the key, for now. Don't come back. Chapter 7. Misty's hands slowly tightened around the necklace, the pendant pressing painfully into her palm. How absurd, she had moved out of the apartment nearly half a month ago. Yet Henry still hadn't noticed. Don't worry. I have no intention of coming back. Misty said this coldly and strode away. She ran straight downstairs, out of the apartment, and standing by the flower bed below. The emotions she had suppressed for so long suddenly overflowed. She abruptly crouched down, sobbing wildly amid the curious stares of those around her. In the days that followed, Henry and Celestine grew even more brazenly inseparable, like typical school couples. Henry attended classes with Celestine, brought her water at sports events, stayed up all night queuing to buy limited edition figurines with her, and on nights when meteors appeared, squeezed in with her on the crowded playground to watch the shooting stars. All the companionship Misty once longed for but could not have, he gave entirely to Celestine. News kept pouring into Misty's ears. Her heart shifted from initial heaviness to relief, and then finally settled into calm. The days quickly led to the week before the engagement banquet, and the robot competition began. Misty teamed up with 3 roommates and 2 male classmates. While waiting for their turn in the competition, Celestine passed through the crowd and stood before Misty. Misty frowned slightly and asked, "How did you get in here?" Celestine smiled triumphantly. "Because I entered the competition, too." "Impossible," the roommate exclaimed. "All competing teams were selected through previous contests, and you never participated before." Celestine's smile grew even more defiant. "Of course. It was my boyfriend Henry who vouched for me and recommended me." Misty's breath caught, her heart sinking sharply. Henry was always rigid and meticulous about rules. But now, for Celestine, he even broke his own principles. He even arranged for a graduate student he once supervised to join Celestine's team, pairing her with a freshman. Celestine glanced at Misty's darkening expression and smiled even wider. "Misty, I'm really looking forward to today's match. I want to show you that in every way. You'll be my defeated opponent." The roommate, furious, wanted to step forward, but Misty stopped her. She took a deep breath and looked at her without expression. "Henry is the man I don't want. If you want him, go ahead and take him. But when it comes to the competition, I will never lose to you." The competition began. The robot from Misty's team was impressive in both design and performance, achieving remarkable results. Then, when Celestine's team's robot appeared, it caused an uproar. Celestine's team's robot was identical to Misty's team's in both design and functionality, even outperforming Misty's team in performance. Misty was frozen in place. Celestine stood up and loudly accused Misty of plagiarism. The competition was urgently paused, and both Misty's and Celestine's teams submitted their core materials to the judging panel. Misty's roommate was so angry her face turned pale. "Judges, our robot has been in design and development for half a year. It embodies our team's entire effort." The judging panel reviewed their materials and pointed out the problem. "Your team replaced the core program a month ago?" "Yes," Misty responded. "About 2 weeks ago. I consulted Professor Garcia and upgraded and replaced the core program." Misty's eyes fell on Henry. Celestine chuckled softly and interrupted. "What a coincidence, Professor Garcia guided me through the entire project. From early research to the core programming," the old professor said. "If that's the case, let's ask Professor Garcia and see who is lying and plagiarizing." In an instant, everyone turned their gaze back, settling on Henry in the white shirt. Henry's gaze landed on Celestine's face, never once glancing at Misty. "Celestine's project was indeed fully supervised by me." Chapter 8. Boom! A massive roar thundered inside Misty's mind. She stared intently at Henry before her, the metallic taste of blood spreading in her mouth. "Henry!" Misty shivered all over, her voice trembling. "Do you realize what this means?" Henry gave her a cold glance. "I'm just telling the truth." Misty trembled with anger and suddenly rushed toward Henry, only to be held back by the security guards nearby. The judges announced the result. Misty's team is suspected of plagiarism and is disqualified from the competition. "We didn't plagiarize." "Henry, how could you do this to me?" Misty's eyes were red as she struggled desperately, but several security guards dragged her out of the venue. With a loud clap of thunder, a torrential downpour began. Misty stood outside the venue, drenched and trembling, her heart feeling as if it had fallen into an endless abyss. She stood there for hours, until the competition ended, until the teams had all left, until Henry came out holding the championship trophy, embracing Celestine, watching the two laughing and joking before her. A surge of anger overwhelmed Misty. She stepped forward quickly and slapped Henry sharply across the face. Smack! Celestine stepped in front of Henry, her face marked with a bright red palm print. Henry forcefully pushed Misty aside, his voice filled with concern as he checked on Celestine. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Celestine shook her head. "As long as you're not hurt, that's what matters." Henry stood protectively in front of Celestine, his gaze dark and cold. "Misty, that's enough." "Enough?" Misty rose from the ground and shouted at Henry with fury. "You know how long I've prepared for this competition, how much effort I've invested. If you want to support Celestine, there are other ways. What right do you have to treat me like this?" Henry watched Misty, shattered and collapsing in the pouring rain, and a strange feeling stirred within him. He took a step forward, but from behind came Celestine's trembling voice, "Professor Garcia. I'm so cold." Henry's expression shifted slightly. He immediately turned and carried Celestine in his arms. "I'll take you back to rest." After saying that, he bypassed Misty and strode away, passing her by. He didn't even spare her a glance. Misty stood rooted to the spot, the rain pouring down around her as she lowered her eyes, letting warm tears mix with the raindrops trickle down her face. Misty had a high fever for 2 days. When she woke, her roommate told her that the studying abroad opportunity originally reserved for her had been cancelled due to the plagiarism issue in the competition. Misty hurriedly changed her clothes and stepped out. As she rushed from the dormitory building, Henry, who had apparently been waiting downstairs for an unknown amount of time, blocked her path. He pulled her into a nearby grove and asked, "Where are you going?" Henry looked deeply into her eyes, his tone carrying a warning, "Don't go looking for trouble with Seal." Misty shot him a cold glare. "Why not?" "Because of you. I was disqualified from the competition, branded with accusations of plagiarism, and my chance to study abroad was revoked. Why on earth should I let you off?" Henry recoiled slightly at her gaze, an inexplicable unease rising within him. He pressed his hand on her shoulder. "Calm down." Henry leaned in, looking into her eyes. "It's okay if you don't study abroad. We're about to get engaged, and once you graduate, we'll get married." He made a cold, firm promise. "I'll be there for the competition next year." He handed her the small cake and milk tea he was carrying. "Don't be upset. Have some sweets. It'll make you feel better." Misty looked at the things in his hands and immediately recognized the cake and milk tea that often sat on Celestine's desk. The cake had nuts she was allergic to, and the milk tea was fully sweetened, which she disliked. After all these years, this was the first time Henry had ever coaxed her, and it was just to stop her from causing trouble for Celestine. He didn't even know her tastes or that she was allergic to nuts. She took the bag from Henry's hand, pulled out the cake, smeared it onto his white shirt, and then turned to leave. For the next 2 days, she stayed locked in the surveillance room, eyes burning red, until she found footage showing Celestine sneaking into their activity room and stealing their data. She returned to the dormitory, logged into her account, posted the video of Celestine stealing data, and tagged the school's public account along with the competition organizer's account. Chapter 9. But the next moment, the post we sent vanished into thin air. The roommates all spoke up. "Misty, the post we sent is gone too." Misty's eyes reddened with anger as she stormed out, running to Henry's office, slammed the desk, and shouted, "You're the one behind the post incident, aren't you? Henry, you've gone too far." Henry remained calm, setting down his pen and leaning back in his chair. "Don't bother, Misty. It's useless. I've deleted the school surveillance footage and the backups on your mobile phones." A surge of anger struck Misty's forehead. Her head buzzed, and her heart uncontrollably contracted in wild spasms. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she stared intently at Henry, tears streaming uncontrollably from the corners of her eyes. Henry looked at Misty's face. An unfamiliar emotion flickered briefly in his heart, but he suppressed it. "Misty, you need to calm down." Misty turned and walked toward the door. After only a few steps, a sharp pain struck the back of her head, and she slipped into darkness. When she woke again, she was already in a city, inside Henry's villa. Henry stood by the bed. "Our engagement banquet is in 2 days. I've arranged an extended leave from school for you, so don't go back yet. Return to school whenever you feel ready." Misty suddenly hurled the glass from the bedside table to the floor. She got out of bed, surrounded by scattered ceramic shards, staring at Henry with eyes burning red. "Professor Garcia, is this a form of house arrest? If you don't approve, does that mean I can't go to school or graduate?" Henry was pierced by her gaze. He looked away and bent down to pick her up, laying her back on the bed. He then fetched the medicine kit and carefully cleaned the wound on her foot himself. It was the first time he had done these things for her. Yet Misty found it utterly ridiculous. She calmed down and pulled her foot back. "You can go." Henry cleaned the wound on her foot before standing up. "The engagement banquet and Celestine's celebration banquet are on the same day. I'll come back as soon as I finish at the celebration banquet. Wait for me." Henry looked at her, as if waiting for a precise answer. Misty tugged at the corner of her mouth. Suit yourself. Besides, I'm not engaged to you. Henry left cheerfully. Misty sent a message to her roommate. Celestine's celebration banquet is in 2 days. You all need to find a way to sneak in and release the files on the USB drive. John sent a message. Henry says he wants to postpone the engagement banquet. It seems he has misunderstood something. Should I explain the change of the engagement partner to him? Misty replied quickly, no need. Proceed as originally planned. Pick me up at Henry's villa in 2 days. 2 days later, the celebration banquet. Henry personally invited everyone. The competition organizers and school leadership were all present. On the banquet hall's large screen, a video played of the Celestine team receiving their championship award. Celestine stood at the front and said, "Today, I especially want to thank my boyfriend Henry for tirelessly supporting my dream and standing unconditionally by my side whenever I needed him." The image on the large screen behind suddenly switched, showing Celestine sneaking stealthily into Misty's team activity room to steal information. Everyone was shocked, and Celestine sensed something was wrong. She turned around just in time to see a secretly recorded footage. In the dormitory, Celestine's roommate asked her, "Seal, are you really going to ask Professor Garcia to recommend you for the robotics contest? Isn't it too late to prepare now?" Celestine wore a proud expression. "Of course I'm going to participate. I have all the materials Misty is using for the contest. I don't just want her to lose, I want her to be utterly ruined and despised by everyone." Celestine screamed in panic. "It's fake! Turn it off quickly!" The video shifted again, revealing Misty on the screen, her makeup flawless. She smiled faintly, her eyes calm yet disdainful. "Celestine, I've told you. Henry is the man I don't want. If you want him, just take him." But, she paused, her gaze disdainful, "You can't steal the achievements and honor of our team." Chapter 10. The screen went black, leaving only darkness. Celestine clutched Henry's sleeve tightly. Already flustered, "What do we do? What do we do?" The organizers of the robot competition and the school leadership approached with serious faces. "Professor Garcia, what exactly is going on here?" Henry shielded Celestine behind him. "Misty lost the competition and is upset. I will give you all an explanation." Several men in police uniforms entered and approached Celestine. "Student Celestine, someone has reported you for plagiarism. Please come with us." Celestine, pale-faced, gripped Henry tightly. "I don't want to go." Henry stood in front of Celestine. "Please wait a moment. Gentlemen, I'll make a call to speak with the person who reported this." Then, he took out his mobile phone and called Misty. The phone rang 3 times before being answered. The background was noisy, and Henry heard someone asking Misty about her makeup preferences. Henry's voice carried a cold anger. "Misty, right now, immediately clarify the plagiarism issue to Celestine and withdraw the police report." Misty's light laugh came through the phone. "Why should I listen to you?" After saying that, she continued discussing eyeshadow colors with the makeup artist. The sharp, smiling voice irritated Henry's nerves. He spoke threateningly, "Just because today is our engagement day, clear Seal's name, and the engagement banquet will continue. Or else." Before he could finish speaking, the cold, busy tone filled the phone. Henry's anger deepened. He dialed again, but this time, the phone was already switched off. Furrowing his brow, a vein twitching on his forehead, Henry opened WeChat and sent a message. "Misty, please answer the phone." No sooner had he sent it than a glaring red exclamation mark appeared. Henry stared fixedly at that exclamation mark, suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of absurdity. He'd been engaged to Misty for 10 years, and she had always been the one chasing and coaxing him. This was the first time he had been bested by her. Seeing this, the police officer nearby said, "Celestine, it's best if you come with us for an investigation first." Celestine was taken away by the police, and Henry stood there, overwhelmed by an unprecedented surge of intense anger. Misty has gone too far. She shouldn't have caused a scene at an occasion like today, and she definitely shouldn't have called the police. She's deliberately trying to ruin Celestine. The school leadership stepped forward, their expressions stern and displeased. "Professor Garcia, I expect a reasonable explanation from you on this matter." Henry abruptly turned and left. He got into the car, started the engine, and headed toward a city, while calling Mrs. Garcia, "Mom, where's Misty? Tell her to answer the phone." Mrs. Garcia's voice carried some confusion. Misty is putting on makeup and changing her dress. Is something wrong? Henry's voice was cold. Today's engagement banquet is cancelled. I'm going back now to pick up Misty. Tell her that I will only get engaged to her once she withdraws the police report and clears Celestine's name. There was sudden silence on the other end of the phone. After a few seconds, Mrs. Garcia's voice came cautiously. Misty's fiancé was changed to your elder brother John long ago. Didn't you know? Sharp. The car braked sharply and pulled over to the roadside. Henry grabbed his mobile phone excitedly. How could that be? Did Misty make you say that on purpose? Mom, I know you all take Misty's side. But this isn't a joke. How could she be with eldest brother? Henry paused. He suddenly remembered that Misty had told him several times that their engagement had been called off. But how could that be? How is that even possible? Misty loved him so much. Ever since they were betrothed at 12, she had always pursued him, done so many things for him, and unconditionally accepted all the flaws in his personality. She loved him so much. How could she possibly end their engagement and choose John? Mom wasn't joking. Mrs. Garcia's voice carried a hint of disappointment. I've always liked Misty, and I hope she will soon become my daughter-in-law. I would never joke about something like this. Last time Mom called you, you said you understood. Later, I wanted to persuade you, but you never answered the phone. Mom has already called Misty. Her stance was very firm. I thought this was a joint decision between you two, so I didn't try to persuade her further. Last time, Henry recalled the scene at the hospital that day. Regarding that phone call, he never entertained any other possibility. Because of that call, he even thought Misty saying she would never love him again was simply a childish act of defiance. So, it's not true? Henry found it hard to comprehend. Since he was 12, he had believed Misty would be his future wife. He never imagined this would change. Even after Celestine appeared, even though he felt strongly drawn to her, he never considered ending his engagement with Misty. Henry's voice was tight. How much longer until the engagement banquet starts? Another hour. It took 3 hours to drive back from Jing City. Henry's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel. He took a deep breath, started the car, and hurried toward a city. I'm coming back right now. Give the phone to Misty. Chapter 11. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the makeup room door. Misty had already finished her makeup and was adjusting the details of her dress in front of the mirror. Seeing Mrs. Garcia, she greeted her politely. Mrs. Garcia handed her the mobile phone. Misty, Henry wants to speak with you. Misty's polite smile faded as she took the mobile phone and put it to her ear. What do you want to say? Henry's hand gripping the steering wheel was veined, his voice boiling with anger he couldn't suppress. Misty, do you know what you're doing? Even if this is to get back at me for what happened with Celestine, you can't make a scene over the engagement. Misty's tone remained calm. I'm not making a scene, and I would never use my marriage as a way to get revenge on you. I've told you many times about ending the engagement. You just refuse to believe me. Her voice turned sarcastic. Henry, what makes you think that after all the pain you caused me, I would still choose you? I, Misty, have never been the type to depend on you. Misty hung up the phone and handed it to Mrs. Garcia. Mrs. Garcia's eyes showed a complex mixture of emotions. Misty, are you really sure you want to get engaged to John? You and Henry have so many years of feelings. Misty adjusted her necklace and candidly revealed the truth. Auntie, Henry and I are indeed fated but not destined. He already likes another girl, and he would do anything for her. I don't want to make things difficult for myself. Mrs. Garcia recalled the recent phone call, furrowing her brow. Is that the girl named Celestine? Did Henry mention something about withdrawing a report? That's her, Misty said coldly, showing no mercy. Celestine stole my robotics contest materials and falsely accused me of plagiarism. Henry imprisoned me because of her and used my graduation as leverage to threaten me. Aunt Garcia, I've loved Henry for so many years and ended up like this. Do you think I still dare to marry him? Mrs. Garcia hadn't expected the truth to be like this. Her face paled and flushed in turn, and she left awkwardly. After she left, John appeared at the dressing room door. Need any help? What? Misty looked at him with puzzlement. Their eyes briefly met in the air. John's gaze was deep. The blue of his mixed-race eyes resembled a calm, bottomless sea. Yet beneath the surface, powerful waves seemed to stir. Do you need me to help you resolve the plagiarism issue? Misty looked into his eyes. Since it involves Henry, aren't you afraid I might tarnish the Garcia family's reputation? John chuckled softly. Personal matters don't reflect on the Garcia family. If I can't even manage this, then I don't deserve to inherit the Garcia family. He extended his hand to her. Since you've chosen to be my fiancé, I will protect you. Whenever you need help, just come to me. Misty placed her hand into Henry's palm. His palm was dry and warm, with a flesh-colored scar at the base of his thumb, the same scar left when John rescued her from human traffickers when she was 7. Misty felt the strength with which her hand was held and suddenly thought that this felt quite nice. If John weren't 7 years older and living abroad for so many years, perhaps at the engagement banquet back then she would have already chosen him. Encouraged by her father, Misty gave a sincere smile. Let's go. The banquet is about to start. Just as they were about to leave, Henry's call came through on John's mobile phone. John pressed the speakerphone button, and Henry's voice came through, laced with restrained anger. Brother, Misty is being childish and throwing a tantrum at me. The engagement isn't to be taken seriously. It's not too late to cancel the engagement banquet now. Henry, John interrupted, his voice calm and measured, yet carrying an undeniable authority. Misty is 20 now. She is clear-headed and decisive, with her own judgment and the right to make decisions. I trust her choice and am willing to be her fiancé. So Henry, you're the one causing the fuss. Henry could no longer hold back his anger. John, she was supposed to be your sister-in-law. Misty's clear voice responded, after today, I will be your sister-in-law. With that, Misty quickly hung up the phone. John stared at the ended call, a faint smile playing on his lips. Misty's brief words pierced Henry's heart like a sharp needle. The thought that Misty would marry someone else, someone who would become the sister-in-law he had to respect and keep his distance from, felt like his heart was being crushed, leaving him breathless. Damn it! Henry slammed his fist hard on the steering wheel and floored the accelerator. The 3-hour journey was squeezed into 2. Henry quickly parked the car and strode toward the banquet hall. Fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His heart gripped by fear, beating restlessly and wildly. He forcefully pushed open the heavy doors of the banquet hall, letting out a cold, angry shout. Misty. Chapter 12. Misty stood on the raised platform, the tip of her pen hovering over the blank space for her signature on the engagement letter. Hearing the sound, she slightly lifted her eyes, her gaze passing over the whispering, gossiping guests below to meet Henry's eyes. Henry stared intently into her eyes. The emotions of panic, fear, anger, and anxiety gradually gave way, finally transforming into confidence and certainty. He walked step by step, resolutely toward the stage. The bodyguard hidden in the corner wanted to step forward to intervene, but John raised his hand to stop him. Henry walked up beside Misty, his voice heavy. Misty, you win. Misty smiled. Henry grasped her wrist, his expression darkening further. I admit I went too far this time. I was wrong. I will handle the matter with seal myself. Our engagement remains valid. We will hold the engagement banquet again. Misty looked at him silently. Henry kept squeezing her hand with increasing urgency. If you want to hold the engagement banquet today, then change the partner. It was supposed to be me all along. Henry. Misty suddenly called out to him, her tone calm. She reached out and gently spread his fingers one by one. I have 3 things to tell you. First, I never joke about engagements, nor do I want to gamble with you on who wins or loses. Second, I won't compromise on Celestine's matter. Even if you stand by her, I will pursue it to the very end. Third, I haven't liked you for a long time. I believe marrying John is the better choice. Misty spread his fingers apart and, without hesitation, picked up the pen to sign. His forearm was gripped tightly again. Misty looked up and met Henry's slightly reddened eyes. His voice trembled with restrained emotion. Misty, I'm giving you one last chance. Think carefully. Misty's gaze was cold as ice. I have already made up my mind. John gave a signal, and 2 bodyguards stepped forward. Professor Garcia, please leave. Henry fixed his eyes on Misty's expression, then slowly released his grip. Misty picked up the pen and signed her name on the engagement letter. She turned and met John's tender, smiling eyes, returning a faint smile. Henry was asked to leave the stage. Without hesitation, he pushed open the banquet hall door and left. Mrs. Garcia chased after him. Henry, that's Celestine, What exactly is going on? Do you really like another woman? As Misty said, Henry's footsteps came to a halt. Before this engagement banquet, he had been certain he liked Celestine, even willing to stand against Misty for her. But why does Misty getting engaged to someone else and giving him up hurt him so deeply? At that moment, his heart felt as if it were being crushed. His hands and feet turned icy cold, and even his breath trembled faintly. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he swiftly walked back to the car and slammed the door shut. Celestine's call came through, her voice trembling with a faint sob. Henry, can I come back now? Where are you? Why aren't you here to pick me up? Henry hesitated for a moment. I'm in a city. Take a cab back to school on your own. You got engaged to Misty? Celestine's voice shook with barely contained anger, her tone rising sharply. Misty got me arrested. How could you get engaged to her? A surge of irritation welled up inside Henry, but he controlled his emotions. There's no engagement. You should head back first. I'm driving back now. After finishing the call, he hung up, cast one last glance at the banquet hall, and drove away. Chapter 13. Henry's car stopped at the foot of the Celestine dormitory, where Celestine was involved in a scuffle with several women downstairs. Her hair hung loose, and a vivid red palm mark stained her cheek. Seeing him approach, she immediately spun around and threw herself into his arms. Henry, they're all bullying me. The other girls also bore injuries. Seeing her disdainful expression, the short-haired girl at their head sneered. Weren't you the one who threw the first punch? What? You think you can't be challenged just because you've got people backing you up? The person beside her tugged at her sleeve. The girl rolled her eyes and muttered, plagiarist. Before the group turned and headed into the dormitory, Celestine sobbed, Henry, Misty has ruined me. What happened at the celebration banquet has spread across the whole school, and now everyone is blaming me. You have to help me. Please get Misty to come out and clear things up for me. Henry's shirt was damp from her tears as he listened to Celestine's complaints, but in his mind, he recalled the smug, arrogant look she had while talking to her roommate at the engagement banquet. A sudden wave of impatience and annoyance surged within him, and he gently pushed her away. I have met Misty. She said she will see this matter through to the end. Celestine's expression shifted dramatically, even taking on a grim edge. Then what am I supposed to do? The forum is overflowing with insults aimed at me. I've become the school's laughingstock. The counselor wants to speak with me. The competition organizers want to strip me of my championship title. And the police said that if Misty refuses to relent, they will pursue civil liability against me, demanding a public apology and compensation. She held Henry's hand tightly. Henry, you can't ignore me. You have to help me. Henry's hand ached slightly where her fingernails had pinched it. He suddenly realized that after all these years with Misty, aside from pestering him to explain problems, she always dealt with everything else on her own. No matter what happened, even when accused of plagiarism, she relied solely on her own abilities and methods to resolve the issue. She never came to him in tears, nor demanded that he solve her problems. Henry's heart felt heavy, like a large stone pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He suppressed his emotions and said patiently, let's wait for Misty to come back. Then we can have a proper talk with her. You should go back and rest first. After speaking, he got straight into the car and drove away. Celestine looked at the hand that had been pushed away, then glanced toward the direction the car had gone, suddenly flooded with a wave of panic. She felt that in just a few hours, Henry had grown noticeably colder toward her. But it was impossible. Now that her cheating had been exposed, he was the only person she could depend on. Celestine stared fixedly in the direction the vehicle had gone, her nails digging deeply into her palm. Henry returned to the apartment off campus. The keys Misty left were still on the hallway cabinet, one for the front door, and one for her bedroom. He suddenly remembered that before she left the set of keys, it had been a long time since he had seen her in the apartment. Henry picked up the set of keys and opened Misty's bedroom door. The moment he pushed the door open, he froze in place. The room was spotless. Only a mattress remained on the bed. Everything belonging to Misty had been moved out, as if no one had ever lived there. Henry's knuckles trembled and turned pale as he gripped the doorknob. He tried hard to recall when exactly had Misty moved out. Why was it that, even though they lived under the same roof, he didn't even know she had left? A sudden wave of frustration welled up inside him. Henry turned and sat down on the sofa, took out his mobile phone, opened the chat with Misty, and sent a message. Misty, can we talk? Chapter 14. A red exclamation mark appeared, showing he was still blocked. Henry's eyes lifted, and he suddenly noticed that over the past month, Misty had only sent him 2 messages. One was from 2 weeks ago, in which she asked if he was at the apartment and whether it was convenient to come by to pick up the necklace. The tone was distant and polite, like that of a guest. The last message was 3 days ago, when she angrily asked for his whereabouts. Later, she stormed into his office, slammed the desk, and confronted him. Is this still the same Misty who used to bombard him every day with countless messages? It turns out that Misty had already begun distancing herself from him over the past month. She no longer shared the trivial or amusing details of daily life with him, stopped bringing him meals, and even moved out of the apartment. Yet, his entire attention was on Celestine, and he didn't notice anything was amiss. No, he did notice something was wrong, but he was firmly convinced that Misty was just jealous and that she would get better after some time. He even thought it was a relief that she wasn't bothering him anymore. Henry stared at those 2 messages for a long moment, then silently put down his mobile phone. He turned, walked into the study, opened his computer, and began working. But a single line of code, typed and retyped, was edited countless times before being deleted. Misty is engaged to John. She will become his sister-in-law. The thought clung like a bone worm, impossible to shake off. Henry stood up and gazed blankly at the night beyond the floor-to-ceiling window by his bed. Henry lay in bed, unable to fall asleep. He got up, dressed, and came down to Misty's dormitory building under the veil of night. Early the next morning, when Misty returned to the dormitory building, she saw Henry sitting on a bench, chilled by the morning air. Pale shadows circled his eyes, stubble dotted his chin, and he looked more worn and fractured. Misty simply ignored him and brushed past. But Henry grasped her wrist. Misty, let's have a proper talk. Talk about what? Misty turned to face him, her eyes clear and steady. I made myself clear yesterday. Though I'm not married to your brother yet, I am still your future sister-in-law. She pulled her hand free. Professor Garcia, you should keep your distance and not be so touchy. Her words pierced Henry's heart sharply. He stared at Misty intently. Why? Why had she suddenly grown cold toward him? Why did she move out of the apartment without a word? Why had she already decided, a month ago, to get engaged to John? Misty read all the unspoken questions in his eyes. She spoke slowly. Then why do you think that I, Misty, wouldn't leave you? Misty stepped closer, looking into his eyes. Henry, all these years I've done my best to get close to you, always silently by your side. So you think that no matter what you do, I would never leave you? Henry's gaze flickered away for a moment. Yes, he had always believed that no matter what he did, Misty couldn't leave him. After all, she has been pursuing him for 10 years, hasn't she? Misty smiled, a smile laced with irony. 10 years, and you still don't understand me at all. Henry, I can tolerate all your flaws, your indifference, your emotional distance. I can accept an imperfect lover, but my lover cannot fall in love with someone else. She lifted a bright, bold smile. I'm Misty. I don't accept derailment in love, nor will I ever settle as someone else's compromise. Misty lifted her chin. Henry, you're out. She turned to walk away, then suddenly stopped and met his eyes. Forgot to tell you, I'm allergic to nuts, and I only drink milk tea with 30% sugar. Henry's face turned pale. For the first time, he became clearly aware of his own arrogance and his neglect of Misty. Misty, she truly wants to draw a clear line with him. Chapter 15. Henry stood there for a long time until Celestine hurried over and stood before him. A thin sweat broke out on her forehead, and unease filled her eyes. Henry, what are you doing here? You came to talk to Misty about the plagiarism, right? What did she say? Henry finally looked at her, his eyes tinged with distance and impatience. She won't compromise. We'll handle this matter as it should be. Don't worry. I'll help you fight for the lightest punishment from the school. Celestine's nails dug deeply into her palm, her eyes filled with profound resentment. Why? Henry, I'm not willing to accept this. I know I did wrong, But it's all because I was jealous that Misty took your fiancé's place. Henry, I did all this for you. Hearing Celestine say this again, an uncontrollable irritation surged within Henry. Enough! Celestine looked at the low pressure radiating from him and swallowed everything she wanted to say. Her eyes were red as she bit her lip, trying to invoke Henry's pity. Henry, who had always been relatively gentle toward her, now looked at her with a distinctly cold gaze. Everyone must bear the consequences of their own mistakes. You and I are no exceptions. After Henry spoke, he turned and walked away, leaving Celestine standing there with reddened eyes, her gaze full of resentment. Since yesterday's celebration banquet, no matter where she goes, everyone at school looks at her with contempt and disdain. She was once the favored daughter of heaven. When had she ever known such feelings? Last night, after returning home, she even fought again with her roommates. Now, she has been completely isolated by everyone. Early that morning, she went to Henry's apartment to find him, but after knocking for a long time with no response, she only learned from posts on the school forum that Henry had been downstairs at Misty's place since last night. She hurried over to find him, but she hadn't expected him to have such an attitude. No matter how unwilling Celestine was, she was still summoned for talks by the counselor and school leadership. Henry kept his promise. He communicated as best he could to prevent Celestine's expulsion. The school originally planned to dismiss her but ultimately reduced the punishment to a major demerit. Henry was also reprimanded by the school. After this incident, students' illusions about his genius professor image shattered, turning the once wildly admired campus couple into the subject of harsh criticism. As the one who was plagiarized, Misty demanded that Celestine publicly apologize online. Celestine showed up under her dormitory building with red eyes. Misty, you're going too far. Misty, who had originally planned to ignore her, stopped in her tracks. How am I going too far? Celestine's face was pale and worn. You've already reclaimed your honor, and the cancelled study abroad spot has been given back. So why won't you let me go? I'm already being ostracized at school, and yet you still want me to apologize publicly online. Are you trying to push me over the edge? Misty raised an eyebrow coolly. Was it me who told you to steal my data? The trouble you're in today is completely your own doing. Celestine's voice was agitated. If you hadn't shamelessly clung to Henry's fiancé title, why else would I have gone this far to utterly defeat you? And Henry, Celestine said with reddened eyes. He's been very cold to me now. Are you satisfied? Misty, you must feel especially triumphant right now. Suddenly, she stepped forward and pushed Misty hard. Caught off guard, Misty staggered back 2 steps, nearly falling over. A large hand suddenly reached out from beside her and grabbed her. Henry hurried over, shielding her behind him. This scene deeply unsettled Celestine. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she asked, Henry, what do you mean? Didn't you say you liked me? Then why are you coming to her now? Why are you standing by her side? Impatience grew obvious in Henry's eyes as he frowned and said, calm down and speak properly. Celestine grew even more agitated. Why won't you answer my questions? I made mistakes only for you. Now that I'm being punished, how can you? Celestine's repeated provocations caused all the negative emotions Henry had been holding back to finally erupt. His gaze was icy cold. Was it me who told you to plagiarize? Chapter 16. Celestine froze, looking at Henry with disbelief. Misty, standing beside them, curled the corner of her mouth, her eyes glinting with sarcasm. Henry has always been that kind of person, Misty said coldly. Celestine, as long as you publicly apologize, the plagiarism matter will be completely settled. As for your dealings with Professor Garcia, please don't involve me in any way. My engagement with him was cancelled a month ago. My current fiancé is his elder brother. Misty turned and walked away. Hearing her disassociate from him, Henry clenched his fists tightly. Suddenly, he grabbed her wrist forcefully and stared at her with anger. Misty, are you really this eager to cut ties with me? Misty looked at his hurt expression and felt nothing but irritation. Just as she was about to speak, John's gentle yet firm voice reached her ears. Henry, let go. He strode over, gripped Henry's wrist firmly, and pulled Misty behind him. Misty took the chance to hide behind him, clutching John's arm as she peeked out, provoked by the slightly intimate gesture. Henry grew even angrier. He glared at John, gritting his teeth as he shouted, Big brother, John remained unmoved. He glanced at the jealousy in Celestine's eyes behind Henry and spoke as gently as ever. The girl by your side is still waiting for you. Then he turned and quietly asked Misty, shall we go? I'll take you to eat. Misty nodded, and the two of them turned to walk toward John's car. Henry instinctively tried to stop them but was held back when Celestine grabbed his arm. She looked at Henry, clearly hurt. Henry, have you ever considered breaking off the engagement with Misty? Or is it that you simply can't let her go? A somewhat restless Henry finally fixed his gaze on him, but seeing her injured expression did not move him at all. Yes, I have never thought about breaking my engagement with Misty. He finally faced his true feelings and explained earnestly. My engagement to Misty was arranged when we were children. All these years, I've always known she would become my wife. I thought I was merely accustomed to her, without much affection. I'm sorry, Celestine. I was wrong. When I saw her engaged to my older brother, I realized I couldn't lose her. During the week since Misty's engagement to John, he tried to bury himself in work and also made an effort to get along well with Celestine. He thought his feelings for Misty were merely out of habit. He had always liked Celestine, and now he could be with her without any reservations. But without Misty as a constraint, he found himself frequently distracted when he was with Celestine, constantly comparing Celestine to Misty. Even when he woke from his midnight dreams, it was Misty's name he called out. His dreams were filled with images of Misty, her clinging to him as a child, her fiercely fighting for him, her striving to keep pace with him in her studies, and her cooking soup for him in the kitchen. Those moments he took for granted and failed to cherish were like a rusty, dull knife cutting back and forth across his heart. His heart was a confused mass of flesh and blood, aching faintly. Henry thought to himself, he had to win Misty back. After all, she had loved him for 10 years. Feelings aren't something you can simply let go of. As long as he genuinely pursued her and tried to make amends, she would surely return. Henry's eyes brightened. Celestine, let's break up. Celestine stared at Henry in a daze, tears streaming down her face. Then what am I supposed to do? Celestine choked back tears and asked. Henry, you were the one who approached me first. The one who openly showed me kindness. Now, when I make a mistake and everyone despises me, you want to break up with me? What am I supposed to do? Henry didn't even glance back at her. He simply turned and walked away. Celestine watched his cold back, then sank to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Chapter 17. Elsewhere. Misty rested her chin on her hand, watching John drive intently. Fiancé, why did you suddenly come to see me? John, clearly amused by her teasing, lifted the corners of his mouth into a faint smile. I happened to be on a business trip to Jing City, so I came to see my fiancé and strengthen our bond. The faintly awkward atmosphere inside the car suddenly relaxed. Among the 6 men of the Garcia family, Misty was actually least familiar with John. John was 7 years older than her. When she was still playing with Barbie dolls, John was already a neat, tidy young man. She got engaged to Henry at 12, and John was already studying abroad at university. All these years, she had only regarded John as the big brother next door, knowing only that every new year he would take the initiative to send her a red envelope. Aside from that, their interactions were pitifully few. But Misty was never a passive or shy person. Since John was now her fiancé, she was certainly going to get to know him properly. Along the way, she asked about John's experience studying abroad, his current job, his past relationships, his views on marriage, his height, and even whether he liked coriander. John answered every question without hesitation, never letting the conversation lag. While waiting at a traffic light, he even took out a bottle of water, twisted it open, and handed it to her. Drink some water. Soothe your throat before I ask more. Misty looked at the faint smile at the corner of his mouth and suddenly felt a bittersweet pang in her heart. She thought of Henry. In the past 10 years, whether she was sharing or asking questions, Henry rarely responded, and he never did something considerate like opening a bottle cap for her. She suddenly realized what kind of life she had been living over the past 10 years. When it comes to dating and choosing a husband, of course, you want someone like John, gentle, considerate, and willing to listen to you. Life can't possibly be the same no matter who you spend it with. Misty smiled brightly, suddenly reaching for John's hand resting on the center console and intertwining their fingers. John turned his head, raising an eyebrow slightly, surprise flickering in his eyes. Misty then took a photo with her mobile phone. Afterward, she posted a status on her WeChat moments. John, Misty's fiancé. She attached 2 photos. The first was of the two at the engagement banquet. She smiled sweetly. John smiled gently. The second showed their hands intertwined. John's were fair and slender, with prominent knuckles and a small red mole above the webbing between his thumb and index finger, quite captivating. The moment the message was sent, her WeChat moments blew up. Few people knew she was engaged to John, so everyone was asking if she had broken up with Henry. Misty simply replied, "I have officially ended my engagement with Professor Garcia. From now on, any future marriages are entirely separate matters." This WeChat moment was quickly screenshotted and posted on the school's forum. Henry was working when another young professor from the same group approached. Holding his mobile phone, Professor Garcia, "Misty's father's classmate's new fiancé looks a bit like you. I seem to recall, isn't he your older brother?" Henry saw the screenshot of the WeChat moment on his colleague's phone. His face immediately darkened, and a sudden surge of anger rose within him. She announced her engagement to John so publicly. Didn't she ever consider that if she regretted it one day, their relationship would be met with harsh criticism? The thought that everyone now knew he had no connection to Misty anymore filled Henry with an uncontrollable fury. He stood up and went back downstairs to where Misty was. He waited and waited until late into the night. Chapter 18. After having dinner with John, Misty watched a movie and returned to the dormitory just before curfew. John's car was parked beneath the dormitory, and as Misty stepped out, Henry emerged from the shadows. His clenched jaw betrayed his anger as he coldly demanded, "Where did you two go?" The smile on Misty's face disappeared instantly. She shot him a cold glance and walked straight into the dormitory. The frustration Henry had been holding in all night suddenly erupted. He grabbed her wrist firmly, pulling her so she staggered. "Misty, where did you go?" "You held his hand? What else happened? You were so eager to announce your relationship. What? Have you already moved on so quickly?" Misty turned around and slapped him hard across the face. "Henry, what right do you have to question me like this?" John stepped between them, gently nudging Misty with a reassuring smile. "You go inside first. I'll handle this here." Misty nodded and turned to go inside. After watching her figure disappear into the dormitory, John turned to face Henry, the warmth fading from his expression, replaced by a colder, sharper air. "Henry, you've crossed the line." Henry glared at him, suppressing great anger, his eyes slightly reddening. "What? Not even pretending anymore?" "John, I considered you a brother, yet you got engaged to my fiancé behind my back." "Behind your back?" John's eyes held a trace of mockery. "Your aunt already told you, right?" "Henry, I gave you a chance, but you didn't cherish it yourself. Don't blame others." Henry's hand hanging by his side clenched tightly. His voice was tense. "What do you mean?" "John, you've been coveting her all along, haven't you?" John looked at him silently. "You assumed that?" Henry's eyes reddened, his chest rising and falling heavily. He stepped closer to John, locking eyes with him. "Since when?" John remained silent. Since when? Indeed, he couldn't answer that question. Perhaps it was because, at 14, he had rescued Misty from traffickers. He always thought of her as the child he saved, selfishly folding her into his own circle of protection. Their relationship wasn't close, but he instinctively tried to understand her life. He knew she had chosen Henry during the arranged marriage, knew she had fought with others for Henry's sake, knew she studied tirelessly to get into a university, and also knew she was learning to cook for Henry. The more he understood, the more unfair it felt to her. He grew angry, sensing that his sister was being let down. He believed she deserved a better man, someone who would truly care for her. He never imagined that person could be himself. But when the news came that Misty wanted to change her arranged suitor to him, his mind burst like fireworks. He couldn't suppress the smile at the corner of his mouth and stayed awake all night. It was only then that he realized, after so many years of attention, she had quietly settled in his heart. He was either too dull or simply never dared to think about it. A sharp pain struck his face, breaking his train of thought. Henry glared at him angrily. "All these years, you avoided women, yet you treated Misty differently. I thought you saw her as a sister, but I never expected you to harbor such vile intentions. Henry's eyes were red as he threw another punch at John, but John caught it with his raised hand. Chapter 19. John worked out regularly outside of work. Henry, who spent most of his time at the computer, was no match. His hand was firmly restrained. John said expressionlessly, "Since you're my brother, I won't hold this punch against you." John pushed him away, his gaze cold and sharp. "You're the one responsible for how far you and Misty have come. Even if she doesn't choose me for the engagement, she'll choose someone else. Henry, instead of taking your anger out on others, it's better to reflect on your own issues." He turned and walked away. Henry looked up toward Misty's dormitory, then turned and returned to his apartment. He realized that during the time Misty had moved out, he had been living in the dormitory assigned by the school, never coming home. He stepped inside into complete darkness. That light, which seemed to burn forever, no longer shone. The figure who always wore a face mask in the living room waiting for him, who would immediately greet him with a warm smile and share the everyday details of her life, disappeared. He finally attained the quiet he once longed for, but his heart felt hollow, as if a part of it had been lost and could never be filled again. John, who usually never drank alcohol, found an unopened bottle of foreign liquor tucked away in a corner. He opened it and took a long gulp, coughing violently, tears streaming down his face from the physical reaction. Suddenly, a memory surfaced of when Misty was 12, standing in the middle wearing a princess dress. When asked who she wanted to marry when she grew up, she scanned the room and pointed at him. At that time, he was still absorbed in a Sudoku game when he saw Misty walking over with a smile, reaching out her hand and saying, "Henry, my parents say that a married couple is meant to be together for life. Let's play together from now on." Afterwards, she truly came to his house every day, insisting he play with her, teach her math, and do many other things together. Even though he often ignored her voice outright or told her not to bother him, she rarely grew angry with him. Later, after he was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, she took even greater care of him, always watching over him. She was like a strong light, casting brightness into his lonely and dull world. But over time, he grew accustomed to the presence of that light and no longer saw her as special or radiant. He overlooked that light, confidently believing it would never fade, because she had promised they would be together for life. At the age of 12, he held on to those words, but Misty left first, and the only light illuminating his world disappeared. Celestine could not become his light. He realized it too late. Henry's heart throbbed dully, as if a heavy stone were pressing down on it. He found it hard to breathe, endlessly drinking in an attempt to numb his nerves with alcohol. But the pain in his heart never faded. Henry lost consciousness completely. When he woke again, a splitting headache gripped him. The room was thick with the smell of alcohol. It was already noon, and his mobile phone showed countless missed calls from colleagues. He shot back. "Is there a problem with the project?" A colleague's voice was urgent. "No, Henry. Celestine reported you to the school for inappropriate relationships, misusing your position to seduce students. This matter has spread, and the school has set up an investigation team that's looking for you now." Henry's eyes darkened, and his heart plummeted. Chapter 20. I'm heading back to school now. The moment Henry stepped onto the school grounds, he sensed whispered voices and strange looks all around. He returned to the office without changing his expression. The school investigation team was already waiting. "Professor Garcia, we've received a student complaint. We need to investigate and request all your chat records with Celestine. Please cooperate." Henry did not resist and handed over his mobile phone. He was suspended from his position pending the investigation results. The school's investigation lasted several days. Besides Henry and Celestine themselves, all information from the forum was reviewed, and many classmates were interviewed. In the end, they found Misty. "Sorry to bother you." Misty's father's classmate. "May we take a few minutes of your time?" Misty looked at the investigators before her and nodded. Then, they conducted a detailed inquiry into the relationship between Misty and Henry, as well as the entanglements among the three of them. Misty did not conceal anything and answered truthfully. 3 days later, the school issued an announcement regarding the matter. Henry and Celestine's romantic relationship does not constitute an illicit affair, but his infidelity during the engagement period poses moral issues. Henry was dismissed from the school and had his qualification as a doctoral advisor revoked. Upon receiving the notification from the school, Henry calmly returned to his office to gather his lesson plans and personal belongings. As he stepped out of the teaching building, Celestine waited downstairs and blocked his path. Her eyes, slightly reddened, held a vengeful satisfaction. Henry, today has come for you as well. Henry raised his eyebrows slightly, his eyes cold and indifferent, as if this outcome had no impact on him. Celestine was infuriated by his attitude, her voice laced with anger. If you hadn't provoked me in the first place, I wouldn't have made a mistake. Why am I the one being punished, while you still walk around proudly, still the genius professor in everyone's eyes? Henry, if I'm not going to have it easy, neither will you. At that moment, Celestine's once enchanting face that had caught Henry's heart instantly twisted into a sneer. Henry clearly saw the venom in her eyes, identical to the look she had at the celebration banquet when she vowed to ruin Misty's reputation. This is Celestine's true face. Henry's heart once again filled with the weight of regret. The thought that he had once harmed and coerced Misty for a person like that overwhelmed him with guilt and self-loathing, making it hard to breathe. His gaze grew colder, his voice carrying a trace of disdain. I told you, everyone must take responsibility for their own actions. After speaking, he no longer looked at Celestine's ugly expression. He passed by her but stopped just as their shoulders brushed. We have nothing to do with each other anymore. I don't want to see you again. Celestine stood frozen, her eyes reddened. Henry headed straight to Misty's building. He wanted to see her again and still owed her a sincere apology, but he waited from day until late night, and Misty never showed up. He stopped Misty's roommate. Where is Misty? He asked. Misty's roommate glared at him, sneering coldly. Isn't this Professor Garcia? Oh, wait, I shouldn't call you that anymore, since you've been dismissed. Henry remained unmoved and pressed on. Where is Misty? I've waited all day and haven't seen her. The roommate sneered coldly. What? Did you get bitten by that venomous snake, Celestine? And now you're remembering how good Misty was? Too bad. Misty's greatest virtue is that she never goes back to an ex. Henry still asked stubbornly. Where did Misty go? All expression drained from the roommate's face. She shot him a cold glance. Misty went abroad to study. After speaking, she pushed Henry, who was blocking her path, forcefully into the dormitory, leaving him standing there, stunned. Chapter 21. Since regaining her opportunity to study abroad, Misty had been in contact with professors overseas about starting her studies ahead of schedule. By now, she had completed the enrollment procedures with John by her side, and the two had arrived at the apartment Misty had rented off campus. John was dressed in a suit but had rolled up his sleeves, personally helping her clean. Watching him crouch on the balcony, scrubbing away the grime for her, Misty's heart suddenly fluttered, as if a small deer had collided with it. John was very handy. He borrowed tools from the landlord, fixed the wobbly chairs for her, and then set to work cleaning the kitchen's range hood thoroughly. He was at the kitchen sink, carefully washing the dirt from his hands. Misty leaned against the door behind him, openly revealing the smile and admiration in her eyes. John, how is it that you can do everything? John Garcia didn't look back. Amid the sound of running water, he slowly began to speak. I went abroad to study right after graduating high school. The Garcia family only paid my first year's basic tuition to challenge me. He wiped the water from his hands with a towel, his voice steady and unhurried. From the start of my freshman year, I worked part-time to cover living expenses. After saving for a long time, I began investing. Through investing, I managed to cover 4 years of tuition and living costs and gradually achieved financial independence. John turned and stood in front of Misty, leaning in quietly to look into her eyes. Misty, I'm not like Henry, who was raised under the care of the Garcia family, nor am I as gentle and harmless as you might think. In truth, to inherit the Garcia family legacy and navigate the business world, one needs cunning and strategy. He studied the expression on her face carefully. Misty, I'm only this gentle and harmless when I'm with you. Does this side of me frighten you? Misty's eyes, clear as autumn waters, neither flickered nor looked away. She gazed intently into his. She said earnestly, would you use your cunning and strategy on me? John was silent for 3 seconds, then slowly smiled. No, never. Misty, I could have chosen not to tell you this, But I want us to be more honest with each other. My character, the darker parts of my personality, I'm willing to reveal them to you, so you can truly understand who I am. Why? Misty looked straight into his deep eyes. John looked back at her, took her hand, their fingers tightly intertwined. Because I like you, Misty. Even before I realized it myself. I have liked you for a very long time. I don't want to be just your fiancé, I want to be your boyfriend. Misty felt a peculiar, aching tightness deep in her chest. When she first chose John as her fiancé, it was purely a pragmatic decision, balancing realities and the family's interests. She knew John wouldn't reject her, but she never imagined he would love her. She had long been prepared for a marriage of convenience, as long as they were familiar and treated each other with respect and courtesy until old age. That would be enough. But now, she felt her heart, ravaged by Henry's presence, gently wrapped in a warm current, slowly being healed. John raised his hand, and a necklace slipped from his palm, catching Misty's eye. Misty, would you like to be my girlfriend? It was when John came to pick her up from school for lunch last time. She casually mentioned the beautiful necklace on the mall's billboard as they passed by. Just that one sentence, and he remembered it, bought it, and presented it to her. Misty raised an eyebrow, her tone unconsciously tinged with a hint of indulgence. Have you thought this through? Being my boyfriend is much harder than being my fiancé. John's eyes softened with affection. Of course, to be a good boyfriend to you. I've already rearranged the company's work and shifted my focus. Misty, during your 2 years studying abroad, I will stay here and wait for you. Whenever you need me, I'll come without hesitation. You have 2 years to get to know me. Misty smiled. All right, I'm willing. She swept her hair aside, revealing her pale neck, and asked John to help her put on the necklace. After that day, John never returned to the country. Misty realized that John had long since bought the apartment next door. He moved in openly and became her neighbor. He gave Misty the key to his apartment and made breakfast for her every morning before heading to work. No matter what time Misty woke up, she could always find a warm breakfast waiting for her next door. He was truly always available at a moment's notice, whether bringing an umbrella when it rained, helping when she twisted her ankle, or even when she casually sent a message on WeChat saying I miss you. No matter the matter's size, John would quickly appear before her. Every day spent with John made Misty genuinely happy. She did her best to repay John's kindness, bringing him meals at work when he was busy, making hangover soup when he drank too much, and doing everything she could to cheer him up when work gave him headaches. Her heart gradually filled, nourished by John's care. And for a long time, she didn't think about Henry at all, until the day of the first snow. John was delayed by traffic on the road. When Misty stepped out of the classroom, she saw Henry holding a bouquet. Snow piled on his head and shoulders. When he saw her, Henry's usually still eyes brightened slightly. He quickly approached and handed Misty the bouquet, his voice tense but hopeful. Misty, you said before that you wanted to receive flowers on the first snow. Yet Misty's gaze drifted past his shoulder, landing behind him. There, John was walking from afar, holding an umbrella in one hand and a coat he had brought for her in the other. Misty completely ignored Henry, smiling as she ran towards John. She put on her coat and walked lightly beside John, chattering as she shared amusing stories from the day. Henry stood motionless, watching their figures fade away until they disappeared entirely. From start to finish, she never once looked back at him. 18-year-old Misty had been looking forward to receiving flowers from Henry during the first snow. 22-year-old Misty liked the warm coat John brought her and the umbrella he held over her.